Wonderful. Hi, everybody. I'm Kristen Smigelski. I am the Research Project Manager for the Center for Early Literacy and Responsible AI. Thank you so much for joining us today for the CELaRAI Talk series, where we explore AI and responsible AI for early literacy and equitable human-centered learning. Today's session is in webinar mode, so feel free to add your questions into the Q&A feature, and we'll try and get to those at the end. So add your questions throughout, and then we can address them all at the end. I will also add our website and LinkedIn in the chat, as well as our email signup, so you can be on the list for future events, and we can stay connected. So I am delighted to hand it over to one of our co-PIs, Dr. Chris Hoadley, to introduce today's speaker.
Thank you, Kristen. Today, it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Helmer Strik, who is a faculty member in speech science and technology at Radboud University in Europe, in the Netherlands. And Dr. Strik's research is sort of bridges AI speech recognition, speech technology, and also computer-assisted language learning, e-learning, e-health. He's published more than 350 refereed papers, has won numerous national and international research grants, and has contributed to both foundational literacy research and widely used real-world reading tools. He currently serves as the chair of ISCA's Special Interest Group on Speech and Language Technology and Education. Today, he's going to be talking on how can AI support learning to read from scientific research to real-world products, demonstrating some key research insights and how AI and speech technology can help us with early literacy development. We are so lucky to have the right person give us this particular talk and introduction to a very broad and rapidly changing area of supporting early literacy. So without further ado, thank you, Helmer, for being here, and I turn it over to you.
Okay, well, thanks for having me. Let me see, let's try to share. Yeah. And now we have to start the presentation. Oh, can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for your kind introduction. AI and learning to read. So this is the outline of my talk. I will briefly say something about our research group and briefly also about learning to read and AI speech technology for reading. Then I will talk for a bit more time about an experiment we did in the so-called DART project. So that's the core of the presentation, so to say. Then I will briefly mention some results of other studies, other projects, which are relevant for this topic and for the general discussion. And then we have a general discussion, future research, and general conclusions. Okay, our research group. So in our research group, we on language and speech technology for learning and therapy, we focus on atypical speech. So typical speech is a healthy, native, adult, in general also a man, because speech technology works better for men than for women. That's a typical fact about it. But so atypical speech is, for instance, non-native speech, pathological speech, children, or elderly, because they all have in some way deviating voices, deviating speech. And we try to ground our research on both theoretical insights and empirical practice. So what we often do is we develop AI, we develop technology. And with this technology, we build apps, and then we do research with these apps. We do experiments, and with that, users use these apps. And then we also collect the data, which we again use for the research. So in this way, we try to acquire scientific insights and improve technology. So this is a kind of what we call an upward spiral. So what we do is we exploit AI to test theoretical concepts and to generate new research questions. Well, we are at the university, so we do academic stuff like supervise students, and we try to acquire externally funded projects. And well, we are lucky that we can apply for projects in many different fields because we do something with speech technology. It's within humanities, in the Netherlands at least it is. And but we are also close to social sciences. And since we are dealing with e-health, we can also apply for healthcare grants. And also because we're doing education, we can apply for education grants. So that's fortunate for us. In our research, so we are academics, so we try to carry out research, write papers about it, write PhD theses, etc. But what we also always try to do is see if we can have some societal impact. And we have been successful in some cases. So here are some examples. For instance, I coordinated the European project on language learning for illiterate or low literate immigrants. And this became a product of a publisher. In the recent project, where I will talk about today, the DART project, we developed a reading tutor. And the day the project ended, a publisher started using it. And it's now used by 10,000 children. And the same publisher was interested. We have carried out, especially PhD Vika Harms, about error detection for spelling instruction. I was co-founder of two spin-off companies, and on a very different topic, but I just mentioned it, we once developed, before we went into education, we developed a public transport information system, which was used and is still used. So we try to do fundamental research, applied research, but if possible, we look for opportunities for products. Well, learning to read, as most of you will know probably, learning to read is of course crucial for child education and development. But it's not something you learn on the fly. You learn to listen and you learn to speak, but you don't learn to read and write on the fly. So this is something you have to learn. And while learning it, there are several stages, very well-known stages. First, decoding, then identifying words, and finally understanding text. There are some different approaches, but an approach that is often used and is used most often in the Netherlands is the phonics instruction. And an important part of learning to read is guided reading aloud. Children read aloud. But of course, this is problematic in a class situation because it's not the case that all children in a class can start reading aloud. So it requires a one-to-one interaction, which is difficult to organize in a normal school, in a normal classroom situation. If we look at AI for reading practice, well, processing children's speech is very challenging for various reasons. First of all, there is very limited data. There's much more data for adults than for children. And because children grow, they change quickly, there is a high variability. And then even if you have some data, you don't have a lot of data for each specific development phase of a child. And typically children have more disfluencies and broken words and other things that make automatic processing of child speech difficult. For read speech, read aloud speech, in general, you know the text that has to be read. This is known in advance. This is what you can use if you process read speech, so then you have better results. Most systems so far, so there have been a couple of systems, but they focus on monitoring children while reading. So a child is reading, and the system, like a kind of karaoke, the system is following the child. And when the system notices that the child seems to have problems, they provide support. Well, here are some of the systems. Probably the most well-known is the one of Mostou et al., because this has been around for a long time already, with many publications. And if a child is learning to read, if you do it at the early stages, it's even more challenging, because at that point, the child is not yet capable of blending phonemes into words. So what they often do is what you call spelling reading. They read individual phonemes or graphemes. And they early, very young children, they even have more disfluencies and broken words. And you could question how you should provide feedback if they cannot read sufficiently enough. So I will be talking about its AI. So we have been using things like deep neural nets already for 25 years in the field of automatic speech recognition. And this is essentially a specific form of AI. So what we use in our experiments is optimized AI. It's automatic speech recognition that's optimized for the task of recognizing speech and, for instance, detecting whether a word was read correctly or not. What we usually try to do is, if we have a system, we include logging capabilities, because then afterwards you have a log file with all the information of the interaction of the child with the system, and that's very useful for research. This is something we have done before for second language learning. Okay, now I will come to the DART project, the experiment we did in the DART project. So it's children who acquire decoding skills, and we want to develop speech technology AI, which can help them and which makes it possible for us to study what the effects are of practice and feedback. So the research question is, like the one that's written here, if you have a reading tutor, to what extent does practice with that reading tutor that provides automatic feedback helps developing reading skills? So here you see the partners. It's us, the Radboud University, an applied university, a company, and a publisher. And of course, many schools took part in the experiment. Okay, in the Netherlands, 70 to 80% of the market is veilig leren lezen. It's a method of a Dutch publisher called Schwijzer. It's phonics-based instruction. It's a decodable books approach. So what do I mean with that? Well, children read words they can read based on where they are at that moment. So they learn grapheme-phoneme correspondence, phonics, and based on the level they have, they read words. They practice by reading lists of words and short stories. So what we did, we developed technology to recognize the speech of children, to detect whether words were read correctly or not. We made an app with that, and the content was the content provided by the publisher from their veilig leren lezen, safely learning to read method. And since the experiments should take place in February to April, we took that specific content of those months. And we had two types of exercises, accuracy and fluency exercises. So here, an overview of the system. On the back end, we have the ASR. Input is the prompt that the child has to read. The child reads aloud, speech is processed, output are the probability scores of the different words. And like I said, we have log files. We store all the interactions of the children with the system. Here are some examples. They see a list of words on the screen. They click on the microphone and they read it. Or they see a kind of short story on the screen. They click on the microphone and they read it. In the DART system, we implemented three types of feedback. Well, one is no feedback. That's the first condition. The other is implicit feedback. or explicit feedback. On the right, you see explicit feedback. Here we indicate for every word whether it's read correctly or not. So the child reads a word list, the one on top right, and after that, after reading it, the child sees immediately which words were read correctly or incorrectly. The same for the story on the right, bottom right. Another way to provide feedback is implicit feedback. You don't explicitly indicate which words are correct or incorrect. After reading a list, you provide the children with a new, shorter list, and you just ask, could you please read them again? Obviously, after a while, children start noticing and thinking, okay, probably these are the words I read incorrectly, but it's not something you mention explicitly. Similar for the stories, the child reads a story, and after the story has been read, you ask the child to read some of the sentences again. So that's the implicit feedback condition. So we did an experiment, about 750 children divided in 3 groups, no feedback, implicit feedback, and explicit feedback. They worked with the system for 6 weeks, minimally twice a week for 10 minutes. And we logged all the interactions for further analysis and of course also the speech. This is the practice. We also did a pre-test and a post-test online. I will come back to that later, which was evaluated by teachers. And as usual, we had approval of the ethics committee, parents gave consent, etc. So, children, they read the word list or the stories twice. After the first attempt, they get either no feedback, implicit feedback, or explicit feedback. And then they read the words or sentences again. This is the second attempt. Well, we analyzed the words and it turned out that most of the words were read correctly at the first attempt, which is understandable because, like I just said, we have the decodable books approach. In general, children read words at their level or slightly above their level. So the amount of feedback is relatively low. It's 5 to 6%, as you can see. Okay, now we're gonna analyze the practice data and the pre and post test data. First, the practice data. So this is data recorded while they were working with the system, while they were practicing. And what we did with these data is we calculate reading accuracy and speed automatically using the technology itself. So the AI is used to segment the audio in words, and then you can calculate speed. And the probability is calculated, and then you can automatically use that to calculate accuracy. So we calculated the difference between the 2 attempts. So the accuracy gain is the probability of the second attempt minus the probability of the first attempt. If they pronounce it better, the second time there should be an accuracy gain. Speed gain is the number of graphemes per second of the second attempt minus the first attempt. So if they start speaking faster in the second attempt, speed gain should be positive. Okay, here are the results. I will first present the results for accuracy, and after that I will present the results for speed. So on the top left, you see incorrect. Red is no feedback, green is explicit feedback, blue is implicit feedback. You can see that first, and here is the correct. This is 0. So if the first attempt is correct, you see that there's almost no change in the accuracy. However, if the first attempt is incorrect, you can see that there is a large gain in the accuracy. The accuracy gain is significant. It is significantly larger for feedback compared to no feedback, and it's significantly larger for explicit feedback compared to implicit feedback. So these are the results for accuracy. The results for speed. Again, this is the first is incorrect, this is the first is correct. If the first is correct, then you see that the second attempt is faster. It's more fluent. This is especially the case for the two feedback conditions. If the first is incorrect, this is 0, then the second is much slower. And this is, but it's significantly less for implicit feedback. So this was practice data. During practice, we record the audio, we have log files, so we analyzed it, and that's the results I've just presented to you. Now we look at pre and post-test data. For pre and post-test, well, children read aloud again, they were recorded. For each child, 3 lists of words, of 24 words before, and 3 lists of 24 words after practice. The words in the pre-test and post-test were not identical. In general, you can say that the post-test is more difficult. Recordings were evaluated, reliability is sufficient, and we calculated set scores. Here you can see the number of tests that were completed. So then we analyzed pre and post-test recordings. Here you see the results for the set scores. Pre-test, post-test for the 3 different feedback conditions. And you have to note again that the post-test is more difficult. So we did a linear mixed effect regression analysis on the Z scores, and here are the results. No significant differences for feedback conditions. Significant effect for the score in the pre-test. If you're better in the pre-test, you're better in the post-test. Significant effect for number of first attempts, and a significant interaction between number of first attempts and reading level. So weak readers improve more than average or good readers. So if we look at the data of the DART experiments, so what do we see? For the online practice data, we see first correct, then second is faster. First incorrect, then second is slower, but the accuracy is significantly higher. So I think these are plausible results. So there's a trade-off relationship between accuracy and speed. Obviously, if the first is incorrect, children slow down and try to pronounce it more carefully. In the practice data, we see a significant effect of feedback condition. It's mentioned here. However, in the pre and post test, we do not see a significant effect of feedback condition. We do see a significant effect of number of first attempts, and that the effect is stronger for weak readers than average readers. Some general remarks. In all feedback conditions, so also the no feedback condition, children had to read aloud. That's different, of course, in classroom practice, and this is already probably better than not doing anything at all, even with no feedback. And we noticed that children tended to speak more clearly when they are working with the app, with the DART app. So we see this discrepancy between practice data and post data. Well, a possible explanation can be the following, as shown here. In practice data, we calculated accuracy and speed automatically with the technology itself. Well, in the pre and post test, it was annotated by teachers. In the practice data, we of course, we used the words that were practiced in the Dart app itself, but in the pre and post test, different words were used. So it's a kind of generalization. And in the practice data, of course, it's very short term. It's during practice, while a pre and post test, the post test, it's long term. It's several weeks. So it's a kind of retention. This can explain, so briefly, for the words practice, feedback has a significant effect immediately. For other words, on the long term, there is no significant effect of feedback. So an app like this is promising. Children can read it by themselves. And it's a way of, for them, it's a way of training, learning to read. And it's also a way of doing research. Okay, so this is the Dart project, the experiment in the Dart project. Now I'm going to move to another presentation with some other results, because they are, like I said, they are relevant for the discussion. So I will go over this fairly quickly. It's just that you know about the results of these experiments from some of the other projects. So this is a project on computer-assisted pronunciation training. We developed a system, again, with content from another publisher. People had a kind of simulated dialogue with the system, and they got feedback on pronunciation errors they made. And here are the results. We targeted 11 sounds that were problematic for foreigners learning Dutch. We developed technology to automatically classify these sounds, whether they were spoken correctly or incorrectly, and we gave feedback on these sounds. Here you can see the percentage of errors, pre-test, post-test. This is for the other sounds, this is for the targeted sounds, this is for the experimental group, and this is for a control group. Most important here, there is a significant larger reduction for the targeted sounds on which they got feedback. So in this case, for this experiment on pronunciation error, feedback, there is a significant effect of feedback. So that's one experiment.
Helmer, I'm sorry to interrupt. I think we can't see your screen anymore. We lost your slide.
Oh, sorry. That's good that you mentioned this. I have share on. Oh, okay. Where
just when you switch to the second part of the talk, that's when it started.
Let me see. I clicked on share, screen 2, share.
All right, it's back. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Then I will briefly repeat this. This is the. Oh, now I have to make it larger again. Yeah. Okay. This is the interface. People practicing with the system. Like I said, it's pronunciation error detection. So I'll briefly repeat this. This is the percentage of errors, the percentage of sounds spoken incorrectly. We had 11 targeted sounds. These are the other sounds. Pre and post. This is an experimental group, and this is a control group. The important thing is people get feedback for these 11 targeted sounds. Here there is a significant larger reduction in number of errors compared to the no feedback condition. So for this experiment, with feedback on pronunciation errors, there is a significant effect of feedback. Okay, other project on grammar. This is the way we carried out the experiment. You have a pre-test with a questionnaire and some tests, post-test, again with a questionnaire and some tests, and in between is the training, the practice. One group gets corrective feedback, the other group doesn't get corrective feedback. And we want to see what's the effect of corrective feedback in this case. So here are the results. So this is about learning a grammatical construct, foreigners learning Dutch. Corrective feedback group, the no corrective feedback group, pre-test, post-test, mean score. So after 9 minutes, minimally 90 minutes of training, you see on general an improvement. Some, not for all, but for most of them. For the high proficient learners, above the dotted line, we say, okay, here we have a ceiling effect, so we remove them from the analysis. For the other, we see a significant interaction of time with condition. Briefly, so there is a significantly larger gain for corrective feedback versus no corrective feedback. So also in this experiment, the other one was about pronunciation, learning to pronounce Dutch sounds. This is about verb second, learning a grammatical construct. Also here, we see that feedback has a significant effect. So these results will come back in the discussion later. Okay, what we also did is we studied participants with different education levels. So in general, experiments done at universities the participants are also university students. So high educated students. What we wondered, what's the situation with mid or low educated students? And here you can see the results with corrective feedback, no corrective feedback. This is for high level, mid level, low level. So for high educated learners, we do see a significant improvement. So corrective for mid also, but low educated do not improve. And even in the no corrective feedback, especially the high, but also the mid education level students still can improve, but this is not the case for the low educated level. So we have to be careful in generalizing results. If they are found for a certain group, you cannot always generalize them to another group. Okay, I already mentioned this corrective. So corrective feedback, indeed, there is a significant effect. It's more beneficial than no corrective feedback, but we do find different results for different education levels. So this is another project. Now we go to the modality experiment, which is quite interesting. This is a small scale experiment. But what we did is we randomly assigned participants to oral or written practice. So they were either training with an oral system or with a written system. And we tested them on both oral and written production. So here you see the group for oral training, here you see the group for written training, the written test and the oral test. And what we measure here is what's in the table is gains, percentage of utterance correct. This is about the same grammatical construct per verb second. You see means and standard deviation. And what can be observed here is that the means for oral training are larger than the ones for written training. So we see higher gains for oral training, but both for the written and the oral test. So briefly, this is a very brief summary. If you want to learn to write better, well, oral training could also be beneficial. All right, briefly, something about the DISCO project. In the DISCO project, we developed a system, again, for a kind of conversation with the system, a simulated dialogue. You could choose a partner to talk to, and then you had a conversation with that partner you choose. And what I want to tell you about for this experiment is that there are, later I will tell about more ways you can evaluate these kind of systems, educational systems, in many different ways. For instance, what we did here is, if you take the log files and the audio recordings, we ask experts to annotate them, and then you can evaluate them at this level for accuracy. So both there were grammar exercises. So we evaluated grammar accuracy, and it was 73 to 88% correct. So in 73 to 88%, we could provide the correct feedback to learners. The pronunciation feedback, well, the score is 87 till 99%. So it's not perfect, but in many of the experiments, we have seen that it doesn't have to be perfect to still get a significant effect. First way of evaluation is analyzing interactions and audio. Another way this is often done is questionnaires. So questionnaires is a very easy way to evaluate educational systems. However, what we have noticed and others have noticed, participants are usually positive. And it could be the case that, well, that the system is good, or they like the system, but obviously you should take care, because there can be a novelty effect. That's one thing. This is something new, and at the beginning they would like it. And we could have the Hawthorne effect. They know that they are being, let's say, watched, so then they are more likely to be positive. Okay, and I think finally this one is this, something about testing. I will come back to that later. So what we did here is we had read speech and spontaneous speech of different levels, beginner, more intermediate, more advanced, beginner, intermediate. This is read speech, this is spontaneous speech. And the question was here is, to what extent can we test the level of the speaker? So we used technology, AI, speech technology, to calculate all kinds of measures, like articulation rate, rate of speech, etc., etc. For read speech, different levels. This is for all the read speech, and this is for all the spontaneous speech. Details are not important here. Important is the following slide, but here you can see this is the ratio of spontaneous speech to read speech. In some cases, the ratio is quite large. So for instance, this one, duration of silent pauses is much larger in spontaneous speech. And this one, filled pauses, is much larger in spontaneous speech than read speech, which makes sense. But the important part is here for testing. If you look at read speech, you can obtain quite high correlations. Briefly, if you look at temporal measures, they are a good indicator of the fluency of the speaker. For spontaneous speech, it's a bit more difficult. Okay, these are the results from the other experiments I've told. So, and now I'm going to stop share again. Now I'm going to continue here. And now I should share again, but where is this? There. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I've told you about the DART project in more detail, and I've briefly mentioned some other results from other experiments. Okay. General discussion. So the point here is, if you want to do research for AI, speech technology for educational system, it's so complex, and this is what I want to show you. And that's why I presented the results of some of the experiments. First of all, like I told you, it's very processing child speech is very challenging. That's why most of the research is done by, let's say, technology persons. what we then often notice that it's a kind of technology push rather than a demand pull. It's not the educational persons, but the technology persons. And of course, a good system should, the technology should be good, but it should be in line with the educational requirements. An important question is, when you carry out this kind of research, is should you use an existing commercial app? But that's a black box, and you cannot change anything about it, or develop something yourself. Well, that's better, especially also for privacy reasons, because if you are using speech technology, the AI technology from a big company, they have your speech and the speech of the children. This is not something you would like in general. But developing is complex for many different reasons. I will not go into detail, but to design and develop an app requires a lot of expertise. And you have to define the task, you have to find content, you have to think about the user interface and the user experience. So if you want to develop a good app, it's a lot of work and you need a mix of expertise. Then what you do, you have to also decide what you do with feedback. Well, you could have no or yes feedback. And if you choose for yes feedback, there are different options. Like you could have implicit feedback, for instance, arts to read again, or you could use a readcast, repeat the utterance correctly, or you could elicit correct response. Well, there are many different ways for implicit feedback. Or you could do explicit feedback, but also with explicit feedback, you have choices. You can do it instantaneously or delayed, and you can do it per item or more globally, holistically for several items. And such a dashboard you can have for children, parents, teachers, schools, etc. And so the results, like I told you, so it's difficult to carry out these experiments, and it's difficult to find significant effects. In some of these projects, we have found significant effects, but in many other projects, we didn't find a significant effect. So it's tricky. So, like I told you, these experiments are complex. It's difficult to study let's say, the benefits of educational systems. And it's often difficult to interpret the results and then to translate them to practice from a prototype to a product. In FASOP, we have seen that, well, there is even deviating results for different education levels. So if you test the system on one group of persons, you should take care to generalize the results. But what we often see is an effect of, well, number of first attempts or time spent on task. And that's interesting. I will come back to that later. There are many different ways of evaluating an educational system. I showed some of them, like for instance, the DISCO project. So you could do it during practice, you could do it with pre and post test, you could do a delayed post test, preferably you would do a delayed post test. You could do interviews. You could analyze the data, the recorded audio, the log files, or you could analyze videos of children using the system. Well, preferably you would do a lot of evaluations, but of course this is quite difficult. An easy way, which is often done. So what we often see is people develop technology, they try it, there's a questionnaire, and the users are positive. But I told you about the novelty and the Hawthorne effect. So the question is, if they have used it for a long time, not just for an experiment, would their opinion change then? But generally, well, these experiments are short and these kind of things are not done. And it's also problematic because for intensive use for a long time, you of course need a lot of content, so that makes it more difficult. And for the control group, well, there are also options, no control group, business as usual, so that is what children do normally in class. You could do that as control group. However, then they usually spend less time on task than if you also ask them to use an app. So another way is that you use a control group with a comparable time spent on task. For instance, a system with no feedback. Okay, and then should you study it in isolation? This is usually done, but preferably, and this is what we try to do in the DART system, is that it's part of the, well, the whole class approach of the curriculum. And preferably the teacher should include it in his teaching. Well, some final remarks. Well, besides reading, should we include other aspects? For instance, writing. I told you about this experiment in which we saw that if you include another modality, that could be lead to better results. And we are now analyzing, trying to do research on looking at analyzing reading and writing errors in Dutch. But this is quite complex because it's even difficult to find a good method to analyze it. And multimodal would even be better. And the last remark in the discussion, so it would also, besides training, it would be good to have automatic tools for formative and summative testing. And this is, I showed you the results of the project ATEP. To a certain extent, this is possible. So there is more interest, both in e-learning and e-health. And well, what we see now is that people general, they develop technology and they evaluate algorithms, while preferably we would like to evaluate complete systems. They evaluate these algorithms offline with data, while better probably would be online with real users. And they evaluate some aspects, for instance, only pronunciation or something, or while a more holistic evaluation would be better. So there's a lot of, here you can see, more data, better AI, better apps. Preferably a system is adaptive, of course, that if you make certain mistakes, then you get more of these exercises. And for other types, you don't make mistakes, you don't get the exercises anymore. Larger scale experiments, but like I told you with your own app, but developing an own app is a lot of work. And it's usually not feasible in most of the projects. So I would preferably we would have good research environments, large initiatives with cooperation, that if you start with research, that there already is software, some app that you can change, but there is already a beginning. Yeah, so a lot of things that can be improved. So general conclusions, the take-home messages. Well, like I said, AI, ASR for children's speech, it's very challenging. It's not flawless. It will never be, especially for atypical speech like children's speech. But note that this is also the case for humans. Well, even good teachers, they are not flawless. They sometimes, for instance, if we, for annotations, we sometimes are different teachers to rate the same material. And they have different opinions. And if we ask the same teacher to rate the same material twice after a while, the rating is also different. For feedback, we get mixed results. A result we often see is the number of first attempts, time spent on task. So that's important. Children should use it frequently. And if you should be aware of what is and what is not possible with AI. And like I said before, a mix of expertise is needed. So that's it. Questions? I will stop.
I have a question, Helmer. Hello.
Hi, Amir.
Hi. Nice to see you. Regarding the reading tutor, how old were the kids when they first start to be exposed to reading?
Okay, let me think. It's group 3, so 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7 to 8.
7 to 8. So it's older. In the US, it's 6.
Yeah, some of them are maybe. No, it's, let me see. 1, 2, 3, group 4. No, it's 6 to 7, yeah. So this is the class where they start learning to read. So it's 6, 7, yeah.
6, 7.
Yeah.
And so the results you showed us are averaged over several years or
No,
per,
no, no. This is
per
one
group?
experiment. This is one
Okay.
experiment that took
So,
place. Well, we had an experiment planned, but that was when COVID started.
I see.
And then we just gave the app to children and said, you can use it as you want. And a lot of them used it. And we could then even analyze the recorded audio and the log files, but we didn't have a pre and post test. So a year later, we repeated the experiment in a more controlled way. And so this is 750 students in one experiment.
Okay, in one age
That
group.
took, yeah. One
Okay.
age group, yeah, which took place between February and April. Yeah.
And can they use the app at home or only in the classroom?
No, at home also. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. That's great. And do you get any feedback as to the use of it in terms of like just
Well,
from
like I told you, the first year when we couldn't do the controlled experiments, we couldn't go to schools, so we just told so the children already were ready to start, and then we said, okay, just use them at home.
yeah.
And some of the children didn't use it, but a lot of the children used it, and some of them for hours.
Mm.
They kept practicing, and they were very happy, told us, and also the parents, they liked it a lot.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's great.
And the publisher liked it because, like I told you, immediately after the project ended, it's now a product of the publisher.
Mhm.
It's not flawless. It's not so. You should be careful. Like I said, know what the technology can do and cannot do. But
Right.
we can already. You shouldn't give too detailed feedback if you cannot
Mhm.
reliably detect these details.
Yes,
But we
exactly.
can detect fairly well which words are incorrect and correct. And for instance, with implicit feedback, well, even if there is a word in there that was correct, it
Mhm.
doesn't hurt if they repeat it.
Mhm. I have other questions, but I'll let other people ask.
Yep.
And I'll just give a reminder that those who want to ask questions, if you're not a panelist like Abir is, we can either receive your questions in the Q&A feature down below if you want to type it out, or if you'd rather ask your question orally, just raise your hand under the participants section of Zoom. And while we're waiting, I'll ask a question. Helmer, I'm wondering if you have thoughts about whether these types of tools for supporting oral to written, written to oral are likely to sort of escape the classroom, not in the sense of students having access to training materials outside the classroom, but whether you see this sort of creeping into recreational reading for little kids, or becoming a tool that children or their parents might choose to use outside the recommendations of a classroom teacher or of a sort of prescribed reading intervention. Do you think that people just start to expect that they can talk to their books?
Well, if people start to expect it, well, I don't think they know what they can expect, because what surprises me, but maybe Abir also knows this, in the States you have some of these products for reading. There were some in my list, but outside of the States I've seen very few or almost none of reading tools, which surprises me because, like I told, AI for children's speech, it's challenging, as many of us know, but it's not. You can still make useful tools, like we've shown, and there are some USA products, but in other countries it's very limited. So either the investment for a small market is too big or something like that, or well, you do require a mix of expertise, like I said, and you do need the good expertise in your group, but it's feasible. But for some reason, it's Well, there are not many, that's for sure. Well, people nowadays on their mobile phones and online in their browsers, they start using ASR more and more. So in that sense, maybe they expect to see something coming like that. But yeah.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see too as more multilingual text-to-speech and ASR systems are developed. That if there's more fluencies across languages that start to become part of this landscape, we may see some really interesting developments in terms of supporting reading in different ways that take into account when multilingual speakers intermix different languages or code switch between different languages.
Yeah, that will make it even more difficult. Yeah. But this is also the case for language learning. Of course, Duolingo is by far the most popular system. And well, the speech technology in Duolingo is not very good. I don't know if you ever tried it. Try to say something. Well, if you're native, say something correct in your own language, and sometimes it's judged to be incorrect, or the other way around, say something incorrect, and they judge it correctly. So it's useful, and millions of people use it. So it's very good, and it's free, and it's very good. But the type of exercises is very, well, let's say limited, and the speech technology is not very good. So I don't know why it should be possible to develop, well, for reading, but in general for educational systems, more and better systems. But there are not many good systems around.
Thank you.
I mean, one of the problems we have in the US is the proprietary information for test materials, assessment materials. And that sometimes limits, certain use cases. But you've partnered with a publisher who is the main provider of assessment in schools. Okay, so that makes a big difference.
Well, but that's so in the Netherlands we have something similar like ETS in the States, and that's CITO and ANM, and we cooperate with them. That's the testing. This one, Zwijze, is a publisher who has the educational method that 70 to 80% of the children in the Netherlands use veilig leren lezen, safely learning to read, of this publisher Zwijze. So the advantage for us is then content is an important thing. Then we immediately have a lot of content. And we can easily combine, let's say, they have many contacts, classes, schools. You have a lot of children that use the system. You have a no feedback condition because the children are there. But that's the advantage of including a publisher in such a project.
Any other questions from the audience?
It's probably a lot of information. It's overwhelming.
It was really interesting talk and very impressive that the level of achievement. So I was very happy to hear from you about that.
I see chat, but can I see the chat?
There is one.
Oh no, that's okay. Yeah.
Just a thank you. Well, I just want to say thank you so much, Helmer, for sharing all of this expertise. Anybody that has questions, feel free you can email us as well. I'll send our contact info in the chat again. But thank you so much, Helmer, for everything you brought and for joining us today. We hope this session offered some useful insights into the role of speech technology and AI in supporting early reading. You brought some fantastic examples. We're so thankful. For everybody that's joining us today, our talk series meets the second Friday of every month at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll share updates and upcoming talks through email and LinkedIn, so please feel free to invite colleagues as well. And this talk will be available on our website, earlyliteracyai.org. Very soon. I'm hoping to put it up over the weekend, so be sure to check back. But once again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you everybody who joined, and thank you to Helmer. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we really truly appreciate you joining our community to discuss these fantastic things. So thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of your day, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.